All right, welcome to the Scott Abel Fitness Podcast, and I am thrilled to introduce actress Alexandra Paul to the podcast. Thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I have to say, I wrote down that introducing you as actress Alexandra Paul just seems inadequate after doing my due diligence to have you on and looking at your bio and your resume and stuff. I think it's just way too one-dimensional to just say, "Oh, actress Alexandra Paul." Or do you feel that way sometimes, or are you like you're so much more than that, right?
Well, yes, I certainly I'm fortunate to have a very full life. I consider myself triple A athlete, activist, and actress. That's and of course, I've been married. I've been with my husband for almost 25 years, incredibly happy. And I have a podcast, a vegan podcast. Maybe that's considered part of my activism. And I live here in Los Angeles.
Awesome. Before we get started in nitty gritty stuff, I just have to applaud you as a working actress, person of integrity, and a person who doesn't just talk the talk. I mean, we live in an age of insta nonsense where everyone, fake it till you make it. And even after they make it, they're still faking it. So looking into your stuff, it's very, very impressive. You're an impressive human being. I don't want to say impressive lady because that just sounds, again, too limiting. But I want to get into some of that stuff for my audience because I'm all about leadership, mentorship, empowerment, all those kind of things, teaching people, not giving them a fish, teaching them to fish. So
that's a funny analogy, but okay.
You know the analogy, right? You know the story. Yeah. Okay. So it struck me when I was doing, getting ready for this, that you were like a game changer way before there existed the game changers that's so popular now. You were way out in front of this. Yes.
Well, I turned vegetarian when I was 14. That was back in 74. And so, yes, it was unusual for people to be vegetarians. I read a book called Diet for a Small Planet by Frances Moore Lappé. And it was mostly an environmental treatise on why the benefits of not eating meat. So I cared very much about the environment. So I gave up meat. And then a couple years later in high school, I wrote a book report on a book called Animal Liberation by Peter Singer. It's still an amazing book. And it was about the ethical reasons why animals shouldn't be exploited. So I had even more reason to not eat animals. And it wasn't until my 20s that I really recognized that there was more to caring about animals than just not eating them. It was about not exploiting them. And I had already given up wearing animals in makeup that was tested on animals. And in fact, in my early contracts as an actress, when I was in my early 20s, it stipulated that makeup couldn't be tested on animals. This was in the 80s, so that was not at all a normal contract addition. But no one seemed to balk at it because there were a few known companies that weren't testing, and makeup artists were very amenable. And but it wasn't until 10 years ago that actually became full vegan, meaning I gave up dairy also. So I had already given up wearing animals, using animals, and eating animals, but I still basically ate their secretions, milk and honey.
Right.
And I stopped that 10 years ago and became full vegan, which changed me in more ways than I could have imagined.
Go ahead.
Just that one step.
Just speak a few ways for my audience.
You wouldn't think that someone who had been for so long not eating animals and not wearing animals, so hadn't been wearing animals since the 80s and been really aware of products tested on animals, had for a long time been very conscientious about what animals I was working with in movies.
Right.
Also. But just that last step to full veganism, where I gave up the dairy that I was so afraid to give up because I thought I would be deprived, it changed my outlook on the world, by becoming completely vegan, it opened my heart for one thing, and I became more empathetic. And it also opened my eyes to injustice and inequality, not just in terms of how we treat animals, but also how we treat humans. It was really interesting. It surprised even me. I always say, I thought I went vegan for my health and for the environment, and for animals, but what I really didn't know was that it was going to change me as a person.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned it made you more empathetic. We're going to put all this in the show notes, the books that you've mentioned and stuff as well, but I can't imagine you being any more empathetic. So after going through your stuff, so it's people will get that, and we'll turn them onto your website and stuff, and they will understand, because it's blown away stuff. If I can just switch gears for a minute to your acting and stuff, like Baywatch, of course, and other stuff, over 100 feature films. When I looked at your resume, it's killer. You've been working consistently in acting since 1982. Something every year is on your resume from 82 till now. And just a quick personal shout out, Mad Men was my favorite show of all time. So,
so I did have a small part on Mad Men, yes.
Yes, yeah, no, I looked it up. So speaking to that stuff, there's a few things I'd like to go through, kind of like back and forth, like from then till now, and see what we can pull out of that. Like, you're certainly working your craft, and acting is definitely a craft, especially for someone who's been at it as long as you have. And I'm always looking for common themes and convergent modes of self-improvement. So one of the things I wanted to have you address is, what personal skills or characteristics do you hone from working your craft that are transferable to living a contented life, like you described, like a happy marriage? And I haven't even got to your fitness exploits yet, but what do you consider transferable to my audience, like many of whom reach out to me because they're still trying to figure things out for themselves? And I've always found working my craft just helps me know who I am and what I'm about, and then the rest is noise. But what does working your craft build in you that's sort of transferable to the rest of your life?
Well, one thing, when you're an actor and you play a character who might not be reputable or kind, or it's a person whom a murderer. If I'm to play that character, I can't judge that character. I can't say, oh, that person is bad, because the people who do those things, they don't think they're bad. So if I judge them like that, then I'm not truly inhabiting them. And so that's one thing, is you've got to lose judgment and sort of, I guess, be in that person, the shoes of the character. And maybe that gives me an ability to be in the shoes of animals. I think if people stopped and really looked and thought about a chicken or a pig or farm animals whom we treat so differently than we do our dogs and our cats, we would, and really looked at them, we would see that they have lives and wants and dreams and families and fears,
emotional
and
intelligence, and yeah. And if we look across
like
culture,
humans.
I'm sure you're aware of the dog carnivals in China and what goes on there, and here we are beloving these animals, and here they are, like, I won't even get into that, but you reminded me of.
Yes, and also I went to Taiji, Japan, which is where they slaughter the dolphins.
Right.
For dolphin meat, which is eaten in Asia, and also where they capture them to sell them to different marine parks and things. And we Americans are just horrified at that. But yet the Japanese look at us and go, look at how you treat cows and pigs. And so we really have to be careful when we judge other cultures and look at our own.
Yeah, we certainly have our own cultural bias. It's interesting what you said about inhabiting a character. You reminded me, even the words you used reminded me of Matt Damon's character in Talented Mr. Ripley, where he says, no matter how gruesome the acts are that someone does, no one considers themselves a bad person.
Oh, yeah, that's exactly right.
So, yeah, I'm a media consumer of quality media, not reality shows and all the rest of the nonsense. But yeah, I love that stuff. I was forgot where I was
What's your
going
favorite
with that.
movie from this year?
No, I don't really have one.
Uh,
Go ahead. What's yours?
Oh, I find that I liked Once Upon a Time in Hollywood a lot, and it's funny because
Mhm.
I've never seen a Quentin Tarantino movie all the way through, but I did like that one. This is from 2019. I just was curious. Yeah,
Yeah, well, Brad Pitt's one of my favorite actors for sure, and not because of notoriety. I just his versatility in the roles he's played
yeah.
is impressive. He's also someone who works his craft, and I don't think he gets enough credit for that because of his public image and all the rest of it. So, if I can just stay with that for a minute, we'll go back to the Baywatch years. How tough was that on you? This is for like the ladies that I try to help. You keep in mind here, I have people who reach out to me who are challenged with weight, or they've been a stay-at-home mom for a number of years, and along with that they forgot thinking about themselves and taking care about themselves because they were taking care of a husband and kids, and now it's 40 pounds later, and they'll even use terms like, I'm embarrassed to even join a gym, so like, where do I start? So it got me thinking, like, for someone like yourself, the Baywatch years, how tough was that on you in terms of like constant body image pressure? I mean, it's hard enough on women in general, but that was one of the first shows where part of the tune-in attraction was hot bods, right? I mean, it was even referred to in Friends with Joey and Chandler, like getting set for the beginning of Baywatch, right? I just like, did that feel like added pressure? How did you handle that kind of constant body inspection? Or was it something you were even aware of? And I'll even make a little caveat there. It might be a little, you might be sort of like an outlier there because of your depth as a person. I mean, just reading your stuff, it's obvious you're a little deeper than most people, right? I mean,
I will assure you that when it comes to weight and looks, I am a very typical woman,
right?
and I
Okay.
think
So
so.
how did you handle that back then? Then that must have been enormous pressure.
Well, actually, interestingly, it wasn't difficult because of one thing, and that is because I had been bulimic from age 16 to 28. And the year that I recovered and stopped throwing up and binging and purging was the year that I was, after about 6 months later, I was offered Baywatch. And so the freedom I had from not being so having this urge to binge and purge was so liberating.
I was
And
going to use that word. Yeah.
my weight actually went down after I stopped binging and purging, because after a while the reason that you do anything that you're addicted to doesn't work anymore, and you end up just being addicted to the behavior.
Yeah.
So it
You're
wasn't
now
working.
working for it. It's not working for you.
Exactly. So I wasn't by any means overweight, but I just remember that, I don't know, I just didn't have to worry about food anymore. And it was huge. And not worrying about whether I was going to binge. I mean, it was huge for me. And I wouldn't have actually accepted the offer to work on the show if I was still bulimic, because it
There
would
you
have
go.
put too much pressure. But because I wasn't anymore, I didn't really think about it. And another thing is that I was on a show with women who looked very different than I, because I was the only actor who had very small breasts and was tall and slender and had nary a curve to me. And I actually was very comfortable with that, because I grew up on the East Coast where breasts just weren't a thing. I mean, I didn't quite understand this obsession with large breasts at all. And I
Right.
actually liked my very, 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 I'm very flat chested, and I actually think they look great, and still do, by the way. And so I wasn't comparing myself to those
Oh,
women who
so
are
that
all gorgeous.
yeah.
And then the second season, I cut my hair. So I realized that I couldn't be that sexy Baywatch woman that they kind of wanted me to be, even though they cast me knowing that I was an athlete and a very good swimmer. There was still that pressure to sort of, a little bit of like, well, be sexy, Alexandra. And I that just wasn't me. Because I think my background, and I just never was one of those. And I always had played the girl next door. I'd been acting for 10 years. So sexuality was something was very comfortable with my boyfriends, but I never felt a need to display it to strangers, or it just wasn't how I was raised, I guess. So
That's so
I was
awesome.
always I remember my agent once saying to me once later, he said, Alexandra, people know you're smart, so you don't have to lead with that anymore. They just know. Maybe you could add a little more sex appeal.
But
And sort of add that. And I got it. I got what he said. I mean, I was raised and it was all about how well you did in school. And I wanted to be pretty, no doubt. But being sexy was not, being kind was more important to me. And being liked was super important to me, unfortunately, which is probably one of the reasons I was bulimic, trying to please everybody but myself. And
yeah,
that's another conversation.
yeah,
So
yeah.
anyway, having said that, and I had a boyfriend whom I adored and who adored me. And so I just felt happy. And I had also been an actress for 10 years. So going on Baywatch was not a big
Uh,
deal for me.
it,
It was just another job, but I loved it. I had a wonderful time.
it's interesting you mentioned like the compare thing didn't happen. One of the things that I deal with my female clients is I try to get them out of what I call the triple C's: compare, contrast, compete with other women. Right? There's an old saying, feminist saying, that men look at women, women look at themselves being looked at. So it's
And we
not.
also look at other women because
That's what it means. Like, yeah, like
yeah.
Women don't do things to their bodies and their fashion and stuff to attract men. They do it for the sake of compare, contrast, compete with other women.
Yeah.
And that goes, I mean, that goes way back to like history, but it's
Sure.
it's impressive you didn't get caught in the compare, contrast, compete when the stakes were so high. And I'll disagree with you a little bit about. I think it's only. I'm reminded of the Morgan Freeman line from the Bucket List, where he says to Jack Nicholson's character, "I've taken baths deeper than you." It's people who want to like create a dichotomy between what sexy is as a physical appearance versus what it can be if you're actually in the presence of someone who's sexy. Sexy is an attitude, right? It's like Mae West, right? Like, here I am, like all these different shades. Like, I think sexy is what a person brings to the environment. And, so with your agent saying you don't have to, like you don't have to lead with your intelligence anymore. Well, to a majority of people who aren't threatened by strong women, that's sexy, right? Like, holy crap, is this lady smart? That's really like powerful, sexy stuff, right? And the way you sort of embrace self is what I want to get across to my female listeners, because you were in that like microscope, right? From the outside and from within. You used to have people telling you should look this way, you should do more of this, you should, but like you said, I'm kind of comfortable with who I am, and since you were already working your craft, you weren't even comparing how good an actress you were. So I think there's huge lessons in that. Is there anything you want to add to that? Am I missing something?
No, I think the lesson for me was that when I cut my hair, I became more myself. And that was, instead of trying to be, they were all being the beautiful, sexy blondes so well. I could never be that. Even if I had breast implants and took a course in, being, quote unquote, Playboy sexy, it would never have worked because it wasn't me, and I had to do my own version. And so when I cut my hair and I started lifting weights actually again, that second season, my body just got more compact, a little bit, just more defined. More athletic. I mean, I had lifted weights years before, and I worked out daily, but it was just a great lesson to know who you are and just go for that, because it works. It worked for me better because it made me stand out. And in terms of the marketing for Baywatch, they always, there were 3 characters who got a doll, and it was Pamela, David Hasselhoff, and myself. And, that was when they would that was because they were trying to show, I don't know, if I had had long hair and tried to be like Pamela, I wouldn't have done it as well. And so it's better just to be Alexandra.
Right. And there was no Barbie for that.
Right. Well, I did get my own doll, but yes, it was my own doll. But they didn't. In other words, they didn't choose one of the other actresses because I think they must have seen that my character was interesting, was different, was interesting.
Exactly. Yeah, you were definitely were as a character and are as a person, an individual. And just as a side note, like the Instagram pic of you and your husband at the Baywatch 30-year reunion, the pictures of you both are like the pictures of health. Like talk about walking the talk. I mean, I'll post that to the show notes, but you both look fantastic. And I think that's a testament to how we live our lives, right? Which has to include part of how you feed your body and how you treat your body and how you think about your body. So I'll post that picture because, yeah, you both look fantastic. And speaking of that, if I can just segue once again. So in the Baywatch years, there was very little, I mean, at least beyond your years at the time, God bless you for that. You didn't do much of the compare, contrast, compete. What's it like now being in your 50s in terms of being a lady in her 50s, living in the world we live in? Take that ball and run with it for a little bit.
I'm 56, and I notice that people do well, and also because I'm not as famous now as I was, and also because I'm older, I do notice that people look through older people. They don't notice them.
Yep.
Even if they look good for their age. And you know what? I think it's karma because I think I probably did that in my 20s and 30s too. I know that when I was in my 20s, I thought people over 40 were old and probably didn't have interesting lives. I mean, I'm guilty of that. And now I see, my mom is in her 80s and in her 70s. She had a boyfriend and, was exciting and romantic and sexual. And so it doesn't have to stop. But I think that we are a youth culture. At the same time, though, I really like being in my 50s because I care less about what other people think. And it's true that I am deeply, deeply in love with my husband, and I feel very loved and appreciated. And I think that helps a lot. But I do think it's hard for women in our 50s, and men too. But men, it's a little later, I think.
Yeah, and I agree 100% because a lot of the coaching I do with the ladies I coach is trying to get them to get out of their own way with these kind of things, right? They just such a great point that you made that people tend to look through you or past you. Like in my prime, when I was in the magazines and all that stuff, I could walk into a room anywhere in the world, and I did, and I used it. And now I'm like, so when people say, oh, you look really good, ... for your age, I know I'm old, right? Because before I used to look really good, right? Even up to my 40s.
They think you're old. It doesn't mean I don't consider myself old. Like I think 50s is a great, great time. And if you eat well and exercise regularly and have sleep enough and have a life and you're happy, there's no reason why you can't be young.
Yes, I talk about that in my book. You see behind me, The Aging Proposition, the difference between chasing your youth and living youthful. So I think that a lot of people get into traps, and I see it a lot in Hollywood females, you can tell, are trying to chase the younger versions of themselves. And I think that must be horrible to live that way. Like you can't, aging is inevitable. So it should be something that should be embraced. It shouldn't be something that should be fought against. And I've watched interviews with aging actresses who say, I'm going to fight till I'm 70 to look like I'm 40. I'm like, wow, what a horrible way to live inside yourself. Just.
Well, I think a lot of it is because my mom says that when she looks in the mirror, and she's 83 now, she's surprised sometimes that she's 83. She sees herself in her 50s. That's how she thinks of herself. And right. I think of myself in my 30s, and then in my 80s, I will have gradually sort of gotten used to the fact and maybe think of myself in my 50s. So we want to look how we feel. I think Jane Fonda said that. And so, but I don't know. know. I think someone who's in their 70s trying to look 40 doesn't look 40. I think that's not, at least our plastic surgery doesn't allow that. Maybe at
Yeah.
some point.
Yeah, and that's a whole other show as well. But let's get into your fitness exploits, because I don't think my listeners will know much about that. So I'll just outline a few of them, because I want to ask you about being a health coach. But so you completed a full Ironman in 1997, and that's the full Ironman, right? Like, that's the holy crap Ironman. Like, yeah, I couldn't even drive that distance without stopping for coffee. But so
The
and
Ironman is a 2.5-mile swim, 112-mile bike, and a marathon. That's excuse me, that's the Ironman distance.
yeah.
But nowadays people do
Yeah.
double Ironmans and triple Ironmans. So.
Yeah, but they also do, like Facebook. They do fake Ironmans, right? They do. I've had people say, "Oh, I've done 5 triathlons," and they were like sprint triathlons, and like there's something you could do as a workout, right? So there's two sides to that too. There's people who are living it, and people again who are posing that they're living it, right? Let me just, so 2004, you did a 6.2-mile ocean swim off the coast of Bonaire, one of the ABC islands that I'm very familiar with. I go to Aruba every year. So Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao. In 2006, you swam 10 miles from one island in Hawaii to another. And then in 2009, you swam 11-mile ocean race from one island to another in Fiji. Jealous already. You swam 12.5 miles around Key West in 2012. 2014, you swam 14 miles off the coast of Acapulco. Is the ocean your sole connection source? Is there some kind of like deep spiritual thing there, or?
I love swimming in the ocean, and you notice those are all warm water swims, because I don't do well in cold water. And if you do one of those races, people generally don't wear wetsuits. You're not supposed to wear a wetsuit. So all those are warm water. And
Yeah,
actually, I haven't done a swim in 5 years. And one of the reasons is that I used to train a lot in a pool. And for the 12 and 14-mile swims, you do a couple 5-hour. I would do a couple 5-hour swims in the pool. And I could do them, and I was completely happy just swimming back and forth in the pool. I'd get out once to pee maybe, and then that would be it. Go jump right back in. And then I don't know if it's the internet, phones. I'm not super attached to my phone.
I saw that. Neither am I. I saw that with doing the research on you. I loved. I went to your Instagram, and it was like following 0.
Yeah.
I like this lady. I like this lady a lot.
Yeah. So so I have business Facebook and Twitter, but that's not how I interact with my friends. So but I do think my brain has changed, and I'm having trouble swimming for hours without getting bored. So now my training isn't, so I haven't swum in a while, 5 years, and I would like to do another long swim, but I would like to, my husband says, why don't you just go faster and you don't have to go longer? And I think, oh my God, going fast, it's not my forte. I don't know. I just don't like going fast. I like going long. So anyway, I appreciate you bringing up my swimming exploits, and hopefully I will swim a long swim again.
So it's just pure irony that you got the job on Baywatch being around the ocean, and then you did all these swims. They weren't connected in any way?
I think they were connected in that I got the audition for Baywatch first because I swam at a pool, and one of the producers swam at the same pool, but at a completely different time. I never met him or anything, and he heard I was a very good swimmer. And that's why they asked me to audition, because I always have loved swimming, and I was a junior lifeguard when I was a kid. So, and then I did the Ironman, and so became more interested in ocean swimming. I hadn't really done much ocean swimming before Baywatch.
So let's segue to now. Then what is and just real briefly, because I want to get to your other elements of the many dimensions of Alexandra Paul. What is a fitness regimen like for you now? Are you regimented, or do you just get a workout in when you can, or what's it like?
I'm working on being less regimented, actually. I just cut my cardio workout in half and started doing more intervals. And I used to work out every day, and I don't anymore. I move every day, but I do work. I do plan my workouts. They're very important to me, and so I mix them up between lifting, stretching, walking, and then a cardio, usually on the stationary bike. So I try and get 6 days of cardio in, and it used to be an hour, and now it's half an hour, and it'll go up a little bit. I just felt I got really burned out. I just felt just bored and tired. So
you're learning
yeah,
one of the main lessons that I preach at our age and physique after 50 is consistency is more important than intensity. So it's not, being consistent 6 days a week is far more important than going for an hour at a time and then being too tired the next day and things like that. So,
well, I'm glad you said that, because I need to hear that. I think there's still that fear, and I know that exercise cannot outrun a bad diet. So diet is more important, but I still, as a woman, I still want to maintain my weight, which has stayed really stable. I know a lot of Americans and people in Canada, their weight can go up and down over the years, and they'll 30 pounds and then they'll lose it and then they'll gain 30. That's never happened to me because I've always been super consistent.
Now, I'll say this with a caveat. Any of clients that I deal with when they become clients of mine, we dismiss the weight scale, especially if weight has been an issue. It's in my Empowered Women course, I even had an exercise where the ladies were to take a sledgehammer to their weight scale.
That would be so great. Hold on
yeah.
one sec. I have to plug my phone in right here. So
no worries.
Hold on. You're going to see a little bit of, I don't know what part of my room, but anyway, let's see. Okay. I'm back.
Okay. So to follow that up, so are you someone who weighs yourself then, or?
Yes, I do. I do weigh myself.
Okay.
I weigh myself regularly, and it helps me because I know you've had Dotsie Bausch on, and she doesn't weigh herself at all. And I admire that so much after struggling with an eating disorder. But I weigh myself because it makes me feel like I know what's going on. And I write down my food too. How do you feel about that?
Well, for someone with a previous eating disorder, even though it's well behind you, these aren't good things because there's still elements of fighting for control or proving you have control, which is part of what led to the problem to begin with. There's other issues as well. I don't have to mention them here, but those were things that if you didn't think about those things, imagine the other things you would have time to think about.
That's true. No, I'm fully aware.
The
thing is, I don't think about. I mean, I feel like it's freeing to me. Although I know we've had on our podcast.
That's a confirmation bias. That's just a circular argument, right? I tell myself it's good for me, so it's good for me.
Right. Yeah. But isn't that what counts? That we feel it's good for us?
Well, I would have to know more about. See, with my clients who feel that way, when they write their check-ins with me, like their regular client check-ins with their biofeedback, I don't do numbers, right? They'll say, Scott, when do you want pictures? And I'll say never. It's like watching paint dry. I don't need to watch pictures of you. I need you to be empowered about how you feel about who you are, and part of that is how you look. So They will say writing down their food and weighing in makes them feel like they're in control, but the rest of their feedback will prove that it's the exact opposite. They worry about their weigh-in, they worry about when they don't follow the food they've written down, or they look at what they wrote down and they don't like it, so they feel bad about themselves, and it becomes a grease wheel in the wrong direction. So so I try to remove all that stuff so it's not a tormentor, and you can call something an agitator or a tormentor, and you can say it triggers me to goodness or it anchors me to badness. But at the same time, remove the tormentor, right? It's like someone will say to me, I've been battling weight, or I've been battling my eating disorder for years. And I'm like, well, the first thing you got to surrender there is the battle mentality. Stop stepping in the ring to begin with and taking the punches. Because they'll say, the people like that, for instance, they'll come back to me. Oh, I got to watch. I'm getting all upset. They'll come back to me and they'll say, I had a really good week this week because I didn't binge at all, and I didn't do this, and I didn't do that. So I'm like, okay, so you've won a battle, but you're still in the battle mentality. You're still fighting a war that you can't win if all you do every week is wake up and think from Monday to Sunday, did I win the battle this week? There should be no battle to be winning. It should be something that you're like embracing in terms of who you are and how you live. My angle on that.
I can understand your point of view, and I have read about intuitive eating. We've interviewed people about intuitive eating, which sounds like that's your mental, sort of more.
No, I'm all about regimentation. You can't keep again. If that's like expecting a dog to act good with other dogs because dogs are pack animals, and you just let them go in the park without any obedience training, right? You can't teach intuitive eating to someone who has had food issues to begin with. It's too overwhelming. It's monumentally overwhelming. So, it's not, you have to have the right tools to be able to exercise that. So that's what I do with a lot of my clients, right? And then they'll write me and go, wow, I thought I hired you to lose weight and look better. And, we barely even talk about that. And now I'm the person I always wanted to be. Right. So, that's my goal with a lot of the people that tune into me, right? They have the mindset that, I'll be happy when I lose 20 pounds. And then when I lose 20 pounds, then I can be happy. And then I turn that upside down for them and say, no, when you're happy, then you will lose the 20 pounds because you won't have any phantom menaces. You're not battling ghosts anymore. And then, you find out who you are and what you're about. So, you're a certified health coach. So what does that phrase mean to you?
You mean the phrase certified health coach or that?
Yeah.
Well, I help people.
Oh, you got to hold your phone down. I'm getting
sorry.
all, yeah. It was all.
I help people change their daily routines so they can fulfill the goals that they want and reach the outcomes that
So you're about
routine.
Of. You're about routine as well. And you mentioned it earlier. You talked about part of health being sleep. I talk about that all the time, regular sleep and wake times being conducive to the goals people want. But, people seem to want the magic, right? They were like, yeah, but give me this real funky, sexy thing I can post on Instagram. Like, oh, I'm doing this weird cleanse but you tell them the basics of good health, regular sleep and wake times, regular meal times. And it's just like, it's not sexy enough, right?
I help people see that it doesn't have to be complicated, that they just the basic, if you eat a whole food, plant-based diet, that is, I know there's no fad or anything like that. It's just add more vegetables and take out the processed foods. We work on that and it's slow. And if they have some processed foods that and by the way, as a coach, I only work with what my client wants. So the client leads their goals. So I don't, and if they're not plant-based, I don't force them to be plant-based.
Right. I'm the same way.
Yeah. So it's about, a lot of it's consistency but planning ahead, because a lot of times people will say, oh yes, I want to work out twice this week. And when they're unable to work out that second time, they think it's because they're lazy, and it's not because of them as much as their system is at fault. They haven't planned it properly, and so it's a lot about helping them plan to get the habits incorporated into their life so that they just automatically put them in and are able to get these habits in without thinking.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it. It's all about creating constructive and productive habits, right? Even if the habit itself is going to lead to another habit down the road, right? So little, I call it process goals, right? So for the mantra my clients get tired of hearing, I say all the time, is the process is the goal and the goal is the process. So you forget about the 20 pounds, the 30 pounds or whatever, and you invest in process goals, right? Whatever that what that, I'm not going to hit the snooze button this morning. That's it. There was research done that showed that people, even driving to the gym, that should be their goal, not to work out twice a week. I'm going to drive to the gym twice a week. So once they get there, guess what's going to happen? Are they going to turn around and drive home? Like, probably not, right? So
Right.
they reduce the goal to something that's not intimidating at all and something that's simple to follow, right? So I call it the brushing the teeth exercise. No one thinks twice about brushing their teeth every morning because it's a habit, which is an automatic neural event, and that's what you're trying to create in people, that you're trying to help get to be a better version of themselves, right? So that they can, it takes a habit to replace a habit. But that's what we coaches can do, right? Is coach them along, and they don't see every slip up or stumble as failure. So a lot of the problems that I deal with, especially with the women, is every slip up along the way leads to self-judgment rather than learning, right? Like, I suck, I'm a fat pig, like, why do I keep doing this to myself? Instead of like, well, no, well, find the trigger, find the lesson. Let's take the emotion out of it and learn something for next time. How can you be more productive next time, more proactive next time? All that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, just let me just look for it. So I'll leave you with a couple quotes, and I wanted to ask you about something else, but a lot of the times you'll get clients, and I'm sure you do too, like trying to get to the gym twice a week. Their phrase will be like, well, who has the time? So there's an old saying, you've probably heard it, make time for wellness or you'll surely have to make time for illness. Can you comment on that a little bit? Just expound upon that.
Well, finding time is hard. And I, as someone who doesn't work 9 to 5, 56 weeks of the year, whatever. As an actor, I have time in between. So I have been, and I'm more flexible. I don't have children. So I have to be careful about respecting the lives that people have that are so busy. Um, so what I try and do is figure out when they can fit it in, maybe at lunch instead of sitting down at lunch and having a long lunch. Could they walk? Could they go for a walk? Watching TV, can you put a stationary bike in front of the television? Making it work for them is important. And I also want to make sure that it's the changes are small, because if they're large changes, it can be overwhelming and exhausting to make those kind of changes in a life that's already
Yep.
full.
Yep.
And I think a lot of things can be switched out. So it takes as much time to, grab some Haagen-Dazs as it does to grab some soup from the hot bar. So I mean, of course, so we have to people say, oh, I don't have time to do this or that. Maybe they do. The problem is it's not a habit yet. So it feels really onerous. But once it becomes a habit to cut vegetables in the morning instead of frying up some eggs, you realize it wasn't really a time thing so much as more it was an effort thing in the beginning, because in the beginning of any new way of life takes much more effort, brain effort and physical effort.
And you always have to come, a good coach always has to reach the client from where the client's coming from, not from where we, the coach, is coming from, right? It's not that it's the poor coaches who are like, I've got all this knowledge and I've got all this know-how and you need to do this, this, and this. And I've seen it all the time, right? I'll get people who write me, like I'll have a mother who works part-time or full-time. She's got kids that got to go to ballet and she's soccer mom and she's administrative duties and has a husband. And, and then it's like, well, my last trainer said I had to work out 6 days a week. And it was, the last trainer was a physique competitor or something. And it's just like, slow down. Like, no, you're not going to get there from here is the old line. Right. So,
I ask my clients a lot, when were you doing what you wanted to be doing? Like if it's diet, when were you eating well? And they'll tell me there's usually a time they were eating well at one point, or they were exercising the way they wanted. And I asked them what was going on that allowed you to do that. Was it because you were taking a class and you love to be around people and you've forgotten that you actually love to be around people? And when you exercise, was it because you were getting up earlier? And so, if the client has the answers. That is what I
Exactly.
learned when I got my certification. The client has the answers. It is about the coach finding out enough and being curious to find out when was it working and how can we make it work again?
And we are just catalysts to the client finding the answers. So a lot of the times the client will put in their feedback to me and like, why do I keep this doing? They'll say, I don't know why I keep doing this to myself. And I'll write them back and say, you're the only one who knows why you keep doing this to yourself.
And by the way, I don't believe in self-destructiveness. I don't believe humans are self-destructive. And I believe that what we need to do is find out, what is this behavior giving you?
Secondary gain. Yeah.
What is it? Because people go, oh, I'm just self-destructive. No, humans are not self-destructive. We always do everything to survive. And sometimes eating a chocolate bar feels like surviving because it makes you feel good in the moment. There's always an upside. And when we find that upside, we can find a substitute or a reason to help that person fulfill that need in another healthier way. It's really, a lot of times people are talking to themselves the wrong way. Like you said, they're just calling themselves bad, and like it's a moral judgment about whether you ate an Oreo.
Yeah, my book, you can't see it there, but the anti-diet approach to weight loss and weight control is all about changing the channel in your mind so that it's not about what I call the North American diet mentality madness. And you change to a self-nurturing mindset. And then the rest falls into place. I always say quality of mindset determines quality of behavior. The fitness and diet industry try to turn that upside down. So they try to say, change your behaviors to this, this, and this. But that's not sustainable if the mind doesn't change. So if you start with the power of the mind, which is the most powerful force we have, then behavior follows suit, right? It's like people who go, for instance, yourself, going vegan. There's a difference between someone, I talk about this in my book as well. There's a difference between someone who goes vegan for a moral reason, moral, ethical reason, and someone who tries to go vegan to lose weight. One is a behavioral thing that doesn't change the mindset of how you look at food and I want food, need food, blah, blah, blah. The other is a moral line that you won't cross. And when you raise something to the level of morality, then you have a different quality of mindset, which is going to determine the quality of behavior, which means foods don't torment you in that way. You're not like, oh, but if I could only have a cheeseburger, but I can't because I'm vegan. You don't think that way because it wouldn't be a way that people who make that mindset change would even begin to think. So a lot of the instruction I have, people would say to me, well, how do you do it? Like, I would say nothing special about me. I didn't have the genetics for any of what I did or anything like that. I was realistic about what it takes, but I was also someone is like, what, you telling me you never cheat on your diet? And I'm like, well, for one, I don't look at it as a diet, right? It's how I live my life is how you should be looking at it. And two, no, because that's cheating on myself. And if I'm gonna talk it, I have to walk it. And I'm not the kind of person who's gonna cheat on my character, because then I'm just not the person I held myself out to be. So I'm not going to do that. So, and I wouldn't let something as minimal as food torment me. So it's that whole sort of back and forth with behavior is showing people what they want in the moment. And the mindset is what leads them to that choice. So we can tweak that. Like one of the cognitive restructuring exercises I have people do is I tell them to literally change the channel in their head, right? So they're thinking this way about food. They're obsessed. Oh, I'm hungry, blah, blah, blah. And I'll tell them, well, you catch yourself in that line of thinking, change the channel. Would you keep watching something on television that you have no interest in, was boring the hell out of you, or is like just makes you angry? Then turn the channel. So it's just little cognitive tweaks like that. And then, but they has to be reinforced over and over again, which is what good coaches do, right? Leading by example as well. So let me ask you, I wrote down I don't know how much time we have left. I know you're pushed for time.
Yeah, just a couple minutes. So.
Okay, so I'll skip I wanted to do some like fill in the blanks kind of stuff, but we can do that another time. I wanted to mention some nitty gritty stuff that people might not know, and sort of like an elephant in the room kind of stuff. Like, you have quite a criminal little past, or you've been in and out of jail, and people may be surprised to hear that. Of course, I'm leading them to a certain thing, but tell people what that was like, because I'll add to it, but go ahead.
Yeah, I do have a criminal record. I actually have been arrested for peaceful civil disobedience about 20 times. I actually lost count, but twice in 2019, once in 2018, once in 2017, and a lot in the 80s. I was arrested. Those were for animal activism with an organization called Direct Action Everywhere, and a lot of work with protesting the Iraq War and nuclear weapons, and for gay rights and environmental issues. So since I was in my 20s.
Talk about putting yourself out there. And I mean, I said that tongue in cheek to like perk people's ears up and stuff, because people need that. But I mean, you had to complete community service hours, right? This was no joke. I mean, you went to jail. Like, this is like standing up for a cause and there's consequences, right? Like, it's impressive as hell if people don't get that. But I mean, it's not like, oh, this is like some publicity stunt or something. I mean, you got sentenced, you have a record, you paid a price for standing up for what you believe in, which is so admirable in the world we live in. Like, it's just so easy to talk shop, but
well, thank you. I appreciate it. I have been to jail 3 times, spent nights in jail. I spent several days in jail for protesting at the nuclear test site, and then also against the Iraq War. I was 5.5 days in jail, and then a couple days this past year for my peaceful civil disobedience at a duck farm. And then I've done community service, 100 hours of community service here, and things like that for the civil disobediences, the arrests. I am a white, middle-class, middle-aged woman. And so it is easier for me to do this kind of activism than it is for a man of color, for example, or somebody who has to show up for work the next day, who has kids at home. So I have a lot of privilege, white privilege, privilege of having a husband who will take care of the kiddies and support me, and being able to, and I have a work that I obviously don't let my arrests interfere with my commitment to a job. So I have that kind of privilege. So that's why I feel it's important that I use it in this way, because I am able to use it. Don Henley, who's with the Eagles,
sure.
He once said to me, I said, this is when I was in my early 20s. We were working on an issue in Hollywood. And I said, I really like just licking envelopes. And he said, Alexandra, when you're a public figure, you need to use your activism in a way that other people who might not be public figures can use it. So you need to not just, you are wasted if you lick envelopes, because there's a lot of people who can lick envelopes, but there's not a lot of people who can garner media attention to a cause by getting herself arrested, basically, is what he said. And I took that to heart. And
did you ever?
I still like the basic tasks of activism, reaching out, holding a sign on a street corner. There's also ways. Giving money is important. Showing up at fundraisers and pick up litter days, and there's so many ways to be an activist. So I just, my life is set up, and believe me, Scott, I set up my life so that I can have this kind of activism. So it was that important to me since my teens to be an activist. I always knew. So when I became an adult, the choices I made ensured that I could continue this activism.
And I think you sell yourself short by mentioning being, white middle class person of privilege. There's millions and millions of privileged people who don't move the needle in any direction except self-aggrandizement. Like they don't really, they're worried about their next Botox injection. That's the extent of, right? I mean, am I right? Like, so
I don't know. Those aren't my friends because my friends are activists.
I know, but I'm being facetious because I think, and everyone listening to this, go and look at Alexandra's website and look at her activism, and you'll maybe get a tiny grasp, and you're still looking at it from the outside in. I just when you said that, you're selling yourself short, because what you've done is nothing short of amazing, and going to jail for a cause, whether you're of privilege or not, is pretty hardcore. And to be doing it since you're in your teens, you obviously have a calling to give back more than you get. And I think that's, it's becoming more and more rare in this world of look at me on social media. I'm just like, the more I looked at your stuff, the more I was blown away by it. And I was just like, holy crap, and your husband too. I mean, you both look like you should be on the top of a wedding cake, for crying out loud. So that's good too. Like, so that picture at the reunion, that's great. Is it hard navigating Hollywood when people know you're an activist, or are they pretty good with it? Like, do directors roll their eyes and go, or like other actresses, like, oh God, like another actress with a cause?
Well, no, I've never had an issue, I don't think. And of course, I'm progressive and Hollywood is mostly progressive. I do see, and I really try to honor the actors who might be much more conservative than I and who speak out, because it's important that everybody speaks out, even if I don't agree with them. So I think that's really important, is to honor all people who speak out for their own beliefs. That can be very hard if you're conservative in Hollywood. I happen to be progressive, so it's easier.
Right.
I don't think I've lost work, although I did have a producer when I had to do a job in Canada, and he had heard I was arrested because I don't talk about my activism in Hollywood. Some people say I should talk about it more, and because it helps the causes, but basically just talk about it when I'm asked about it. But he did have me hire a lawyer to make sure I could get into Canada to do this job, because I had been arrested and had gotten a misdemeanor for civil disobedience, and it turned out fine. But I of course am happy to pay for a lawyer if it eases the mind of the producer that I will be able to show up for work. I won't be stopped on the.
You know what? I think anything you decide to talk about, people are going to listen. So, I'm certainly glad we had you on this show. Hopefully the ladies are listening and the people are listening. It doesn't sound that hard to be a better person or live your higher self when you're talking to someone like yourself. We'll finish with something fun. You have any favorite roles that you just like, man, that was fun, or I love that character, or anything like that? Anything that would surprise us?
Oh, I loved playing prostitutes, because everyone I always play the good girl next door, or the together woman who's vanquishes the bad guy. So it's always nice to play someone who's overtly sexual and might be from a different background than I. I was in 8 Million Ways to Die with Jeff Bridges and Andy Garcia, and I played an escort. And I really enjoyed that role, and did research by going to brothels and talking. And once again, you recognize how much in common you have with everybody else. I mean, I'm actually for the legalization of prostitution, but back then in the 80s, it was really not a thing. And that was one of the great things about being an actor is being able to explore other worlds and other lives.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, and I'll leave it there. I had more stuff, but I don't want to use up all your time. But that was amazing. So thanks for being on the podcast, and hopefully we can have you back again, talk about other stuff if you're into that. And good luck with your health coaching. That's what I do.
Thank you so much.
So,
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for having me on the show. I'll be happy to come back.
Yeah, great. And
All right.
what do you got coming up? You got any acting stuff coming up?
Yes, I just did an episode of, it's a webisode series called Coffee House Chronicles, and I have 2 movies in March and April that I'm shooting in Atlanta and North Carolina. So I'll be filming this year too. And I have my podcast, Switch for Good, with Dotsie Bausch, whom you've had on the show. And I have my animal activism and my and I actually have to go because I volunteer for Food Not Bombs, which we feed the homeless. So I'm love people and animals. So that's what I do on Thursdays, every Thursday.
That's awesome.
So
well,
anyway,
March and April we'll be reaching out and saying break a leg.
Thank you so much, Scott. It was really nice talking to you.
Thanks for being here.
Bye-bye.